My name is Claire Bennett, and at 35 I have learned how to build systems that keep global banks safe. Yet somehow I've spent my entire life unprotected from the wounds inflicted by my own family. Outsiders who drove through our neighborhood in Fairfield, Connecticut, saw only postcard perfection white columns, clipped hedges, summer parties by the pool. Inside, warmth was a costume we put on for photographs. I learned early that my role was to be small and useful. Straight A's, scholarships, debate captain achievements designed not to shine, but to avoid being a burden. My father, Richard, would tell me excellence was expected and to keep quiet so my brother Eric wouldn't feel inferior. Eric, with his average grades and empty charm, was always praised. The message was clear. My worth was measured in performance, but I must never make others uncomfortable with it. That splinter stayed with me, lodged deep where no one else could see. On a Sunday not long ago, I walked into a Back Bay restaurant at exactly 11. My family was already there, posed like actors frozen in a tableau. My mother, Evelyn, polished in pearls. My father rigid in his navy suit. Eric trying to look casually disheveled but failing to hide the tremor in his hands. I ordered sparkling water and coffee. My father corrected the server on my behalf, as though even my body belonged to their script. I let it slide, holding my cup in the way that looked indifferent, but was really a shield. When I shared that my team had launched a major security platform, now being tested by 3 banks, my mother's smile tightened before she cut me off to announce a fabricated real estate triumph of Eric's. I had already seen the bank records. I knew about the casino withdrawals, the cabin renovations on Lake Champlain, the slow erasure of the small wood-paneled library my grandmother Elise had left me in her will. They hadn't asked because asking would have made my ownership real. The servers delivered mimosas for the table, another ritual I wanted no part of. My mother's smile grew sharper each time I said actually, and Eric scrolled under the table, his knee bouncing like a warning sign only I noticed. Conversation followed the old pattern my choices scrutinized. My independence reframed as difficult, my personal life reduced to a disappointment. When I raised the issue of the library, my father waved it off as a technicality. My mother dismissed it as musty, and Eric mocked my dusty books before pivoting into a request for more money. I kept cutting my toast into neat triangles, the only thing in that room I could control. Then Eric leaned back and delivered the line that had been rehearsed for years. You know, Claire, you're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. It was offered like a joke I wasn't allowed to flinch at. For a moment, sound fell away. Every forgotten invitation, every averted eye, every moment of being invisible rushed back. And for once, I didn't falter. I placed my napkin in my lap, looked up, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." My voice didn't wobble. We finished brunch in that parody of normal. Richard talked markets I used to brief him on. Eric jittered as though counting down to a private detonation. Evelyn critiqued strangers with the precision of a seamstress ripping seams. On the sidewalk, spring sunlight poured itself shamelessly across Boston. Eric leaned close and asked if I could float him 5,000 until Friday. I told him I'd see what I could do, though I already felt the words calcify into fossils the moment they left my mouth. I drove home on muscle memory. 20 minutes between 2 lives. My apartment in Cambridge greeted me with industrial beams, plants that forgave my neglect, postcards pinned from people who actually cared. I hung my coat, set my keys down, and sat in the chair that reminded my spine to soften. The crying came like weather. Not performance, 15 minutes of storm, then the steadiness that follows. That night, I opened my laptop and exhaled a truth I had carried for years. I had built the Bennett family's entire digital skeleton trusts. Automated bill pays, property accounts, redundant systems nested within each other. My father wanted convenience, and I gave him control he never truly understood. What he didn't realize was that the master administrator was me. I had the logs, the signatures, the trail of withdrawals, the clause in Elise's will that preserved the library for my lifetime use. I backed everything up to an offline vault. Then I texted my friend Theo, a lawyer who knew how to lower the temperature of any room, and asked for a referral. He sent me to Dana Whitaker Brilliant, ethical, merciless on paper. At 11 sharp the next morning, I began a sequence so small and so consequential that it split my life into before and after. I turned off the autopays that had protected their public image. I tightened security on the accounts. I removed overdraft cushions. I left the skeleton intact but stripped away the pillows. Then I drafted a lawful, precise email to the family attorney and the county office. As co-owner, I did not consent to the demolition of the protected library, Attached, Elise's will. Work must cease immediately. Finally, I sent one brief message to my parents and brother. Effective immediately, I was resigning as administrator of family finances. Security had been updated to protect all accounts. Future communication would go through counsel. I clicked send, powered off my phone, and sat in silence. For the first time in my life, that silence felt like space real, unborrowed. Mine, the silence did not last long. By dawn, my phone pulsed with 17 missed calls. Then 23 texts blooming like weeds across the screen. Demands disguised as questions. Accusations dressed as urgency. I ignored them all and moved through the morning like any other brewing coffee I actually liked, stretching my shoulders, letting quiet settle into the spaces where their voices had always crowded me. At 9:30, I walked into the office of Dana Whitaker. She was exactly as Theo promised, sharp as a scalpel, precise without wasting time on sympathy. She spread my documentation across the conference table, scanned the clauses, and finally said what I had been starving to hear. Your position is solid. The library was protected by Elise's will. My administrative authority had been granted by Richard himself. The withdrawals from Eric's trust accounts told their own damning story. The question, she said, looking up, is what outcome you want. For the first time, I realized the answer belonged only to me. I told her I wanted 3 things: to protect my right to the library, to resign completely from managing the family finances, and to shield myself from ever being implicated in Eric's gambling debts. Dana nodded as if these weren't radical demands, but obvious necessities. Leaving her office, I felt something expand inside my chest that I hadn't recognized in years. Oxygen, unfiltered and unowned. I walked straight to a bank unaffiliated with my family and opened fresh accounts. I moved my savings like gathering children to higher ground before a flood. When I left the bank, another 30 missed calls stacked on my phone. One voicemail from my father hissed with the old authority. What the hell do you think you're doing? Fix this immediately. Once, those words would have turned me to stone. That morning, they broke against me like water on a seawall. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to see Caroline, my therapist, who listened as I unfolded the events. She slid her glasses down her nose and said, "This is not rebellion, Claire. This is boundary. The guilt you feel is programming installed to keep you in service." Her calm words were anchors. I carried them with me into the storm that followed. Within days, Eric's texts shifted from bluster to desperation. "You've destroyed me." Then, "You know I can't stop. Please, 30,000 by tomorrow or there will be consequences." For the first time in my life, I answered with the truth. "Your debts are not my responsibility." His rage poured through the screen, accusing me of orchestrating his ruin by removing the nets he had tangled himself in. Richard's lawyer called Dana, demanding my reinstatement in exchange for family reconciliation. Dana's response cut clean. Claire Bennett has resigned with full documentation. Access protocols have been updated accordingly. As for the cabin, an injunction has already been filed. Evelyn tried a different tactic, sending an email dripping with vague apology. Perhaps my words at brunch were hasty. Family disagreements should remain private. Call me so we can restore harmony. Dana underlined a single sentence and pushed it toward me. Notice the absence of accountability. Classic minimization. I left the message unanswered. Meanwhile, consequences began to stack. Richard's platinum card declined at a charity event. Evelyn's country club dues went unpaid. Eric's markers came due, forcing the sale of his condo and car. Construction at the cabin froze under permit investigation. For once, the architecture of their lives reflected reality, fragile, propped up by assumptions I had always been forced to maintain. Each day I ignored their outreach was like prying another brick from the wall that had pressed against my chest for decades. In that widening space, my own life began to grow. I said yes to a conference I had always declined. I wrote code with a clarity that startled me. Evenings filled with laughter from friends who toasted not my utility, but me. The storm raged for months. My parents cycled through anger, bargaining, and half-hearted reconciliation attempts, all designed to lure me back into service. But I had learned to recognize the script. Eric, surprisingly, broke it. 6 months after brunch, he walked into Dana's office carrying a sobriety chip instead of a Rolex. Hitting bottom was necessary. He told me, "And you forced it. I'm not here for money, just to say I see it now." His voice was stripped of entitlement, and it shook me more than any threat my parents could wield. I didn't promise closeness, but I didn't close the door either. It was the first time my brother had spoken to me like a man, not a prince demanding tribute. By a year, my life bore no resemblance to the one I had abandoned. I had purchased a small cottage on a lake in New Hampshire, with proceeds from a fair market buyout of the cabin share. The walls were lined with built-in shelves, a gift Elise herself might have chosen. I celebrated birthdays with friends who knew my favorite cake flavor. When I ran into Richard at a conference, he looked older, diminished. Evelyn tried to corner me at a wedding, still mouthing platitudes about appearances and family. But her words fell flat against the fortress I had built. Their world was still devoted to illusions. I was no longer standing inside it. 2 years later, I sat on my own dock, journal in my lap, watching the sky bruise into twilight. The words Evelyn once wielded as a knife, "You're lucky we even include," you returned not as a wound but as a key. They had meant pity. I understood them now as liberation. If inclusion required my diminishment, then exclusion was freedom. I closed my notebook and let the stars arrive. Freedom, I realized, is not a clean slate. It is a steady reclamation, a refusal to carry what was never mine. It is living worth as truth, not waiting for it to be bestowed. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever had to draw painful boundaries with those who were supposed to love you, I hope my story reminds you of your strength. Please like this video, share your own story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Vengeance Within for more stories that reveal the power of reclaiming your life.